Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Good morning. First, I did not appreciate that you had a very robust security system here in John Jay College. To get in was quite an ordeal. Welcome. Thank you. First, I would like to, of course, acknowledge John Jay College for hosting this event, the Misdemeanor Justice Project for doing such fantastic work on the report, the John Arnold Foundation for supporting this and so many other criminal justice work, Benjamin Tucker, of course, the first Deputy Commissioner at the NYPD, and Jeremy Travis, Executive Vice President of Criminal Justice at Arnold Foundation or Ventures. And then there are two people in the audience that I need to recognize. The first is Axel Burnaby, who's an assistant counsel. He works in my office, has been spending an extraordinary amount of time working on this issue. And the second person is Jason Starr, who's an assistant counsel in my office as well. And he has been working on these issues day in and day out, making sure that we have the most informed, comprehensive policy to advance. As you heard a few minutes ago, despite a dramatic decline in the rate of marijuana misdemeanor arrests over the past decade, unfortunately, there remain significant racial disparities in the rates of arrest. So in short, we may be arresting and charging less people with marijuana misdemeanor possession, but we are increasingly and disproportionately arresting and charging more minorities. Politically, there is some consensus that our public policy on public safety should focus more on offenses that directly affect people, particularly violent crime. This consensus has driven significant reforms in law and in policy at both the state and the federal levels. Marijuana decriminalization, the Rockefeller drug law reforms, the closure of many prisons here in New York State, the federal sentencing reform, and the list goes on and on. However, this shift in public attitudes and policies highlights some of the greatest areas of concern with regard to system inequities, and the data in this report illuminates one of those major concerns, areas of concerns, marijuana enforcement. Marijuana was decriminalized in New York State in 1977, when offenses related to marijuana was removed from the controlled substances provisions of the penal law, and it was placed in a different statutory scheme with what was intended to be less serious penalties. However, as this report unfortunately shows, in the period over the last 20 years, there has been significant inconsistency in enforcement among New York City, upstate cities, and the rest of the state, and significant disparities in enforcement by age, by race, and by ethnicity. A few of the key findings of the report with some historical backdrop provide some context and again highlights why it's so important that our public policy be driven by data. Since 1990, marijuana arrest rates have increased significantly across the state, as you heard. New York City has had the highest misdemeanor marijuana arrest rates for the majority of the time period compared to upstate cities and the rest of the state. And you could conclude, well, that makes sense because the majority of people live in New York City. Well, the majority of the misdemeanor marijuana enforcement is related to marijuana possession, not to marijuana sale. There is some geographic variation in enforcement. In New York City, predominantly public view or public harm. In upstate cities is more evenly distributed across the 3 possession penal codes. And then the rest of the state is predominantly public view or public harm. But across all of the geographic areas, Black men and women and Hispanic men and women are unfortunately being faced with higher rates of arrest for misdemeanor marijuana possession compared to their white counterparts. A difference in arrest rates for blacks relative to whites was higher in upstate cities than the rest of the state. In New York City, Black men and women were arrested for marijuana possession at a rate 8 times that of white men and women, and in upstate cities at a rate of 12 times that of white men and women. But even more significantly, Black men between ages 21 and 24 are arrested at a rate of more than 20 times that of white counterparts in upstate cities. These are the young people that we need to protect and are in most need of direction and support. These rates of arrests have been consistently increasing over the period of the study, despite an overall ultimate decline in the rate of misdemeanor arrests and a dramatic shift in cultural attitudes regarding marijuana. What did this tell us? What does all of this information tell us, and how should we use it in developing, evaluating, and potentially advancing public policy? Regardless of which side of the aisle you're sitting on, we should all be able to agree on one fundamental principle. Marijuana arrests and convictions have a significant direct and collateral impact on the lives of people that are affected. We should all be able to agree on that. Further, low-level marijuana enforcement places significant strain on the criminal justice system with very little impact on public safety. There are also other public policy costs, including significant impact on immigrant New Yorkers, our labor market, as well as public health. These realities, and the reality that an increasing number of neighboring jurisdictions have legalized or are considering legislative proposals to legalize marijuana, the possession and or the sale, led the governor to advance a proposal a few months ago. It seems like a few months ago, but actually it was a few weeks ago. It gives you a little insight into my brain. It was only a few weeks ago, but it feels like months and months ago because we've been working on this for so long. But those realities actually led the governor to advance a proposal to comprehensively regulate cannabis, including the establishment of a regulated commercial market that permits the sale and the possession of cannabis for recreational and therapeutic use by adults. In New York State, we previously legalized the use of medicinal cannabis through legislation that's called the Compassionate Care Act. This year, our proposal, which is referred to as the Cannabis Regulation and Taxation Act, it sets up the first in the nation integrated regulatory approach to cannabis in 3 applications. 1, medicinal, 2, adult use, and 3, industrial wellness. It brings together existing law and policy governing medical cannabis and industrial hemp, which is existing law in New York, and then it sets forth an innovative model for developing and regulating the commercial market for adult use recreational cannabis. The legislation also creates the Office of Cannabis Management to oversee the application and the development of this new integrated regulatory framework. Most significantly, our proposal attempts to address some of the disparate consequences demonstrated in the data in this report. In addition to reclassifying cannabis offenses in the penal law to permit possession for personal use, it automatically seals prior marijuana offenses. It provides for resentencing for felony and misdemeanor possession and sale to align with these new classifications. And it creates robust opportunities for participating in the new market for members of communities who have been disproportionately harmed by the enforcement of marijuana prohibition. I'm speaking specifically about Black and Latino communities. We are at yet another interesting crossroad as we further modify and reform our criminal justice laws and regulations. And the lives of real people are affected. And that's what I want us to think about as we talk about these issues. There are real men and women that are affected, upstate, downstate, in every part of this state, and in fact, every part of this country. I remember discussions when we embarked on the Rockefeller drug reforms. There were a lot of fear and anxiety to match the robust advocacy for change. And that discussion advanced, I would submit, primarily because of the data. People had to look at the facts. This is no different. As existing policies, opinions, methodologies, approaches are being challenged, We must first be sensitive to the concerns that are being raised in our communities, but we must be driven by the data.